I would like to announce that a quorum is present, the meeting is duly called, and a notice of the meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act. The time is 6 p.m. The following board members are in attendance: Dr. Stacy Barker, Allison Lasan, Michelle Alcatab, Sheila Taylor, Catherine Sells, and Jenny Prosnick. I've asked board member Catherine Sells to lead us in prayer.
Heavenly Father, as we gather today to hear information that allows us to make decisions that will shape the path of this new school year, we pause first to thank you for the gift of education, for the students we serve, and for the dedicated hearts of our teachers, staff, and leaders. We ask for your wisdom to guide us. May every dollar we steward be used with care, purpose, and vision to create safe spaces, to open minds, and to build futures full of hope and opportunity. Bless our campuses with peace and protection. Strengthen our educators with energy and encouragement as we begin this new year. Inspire our students to grow in knowledge, character, and compassion, and help us to work together with unity, with grace, and with hearts centered on what is best for children. In your name we pray. Amen.
Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance and the Texas Pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, God, one and indivisible.
Public comment is next on the agenda, and we had nobody sign up. So we will move on to our discussion items. I'm calling it the Mr. Rare Show tonight. You're up.
All right, thank you. Our first item is our debt management update for the current fiscal year 24-25. Just as a reminder, the board approved a resolution for the defeasance and/or redemption of certain outstanding unlimited tax bonds as part of the approval of the debt management plan for fiscal year 25 at the August 26, 2024 special meeting. This year's debt management plan involves the use of surplus funds, and so we've outlined on the attachment on page 4 that the first one would be cash defeasance of the callable 2016 bonds in the amount of $39,410,000, which is expected to result in net effective savings of $5,171,000. The 2016 B bonds are the last bonds outstanding from the original 2001 bond. In addition, we're looking to, for the remaining 2018 unlimited tax refunding bond in the amount of $2,791,233 will be escrowed to maturity and is expected to result in savings of $90,516. This transaction will clear the district of any outstanding debt from the 2002 bond. Anticipated total net effective savings of $5.2 million, or almost 12.5% of the bonds defeased and escrowed. The cash defeasance will take place on August 25th of 2025, and the escrow securities to defease the 2018 refunding bonds will settle on August 21st. And so total interest to date that we've saved through refundings or defeasance since 2013, through 2014 is almost $34 million. So as I mentioned, the analysis of the debt management plan for the current year is on page 4 of your board book. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I always appreciate the opportunity to defease.
Okay.
Still you.
Yeah. I was about ready to turn off the mic, but that's not going to happen. Okay, so the next item is fiscal year 25 budget projection update. And this is for not only M&O funds, but also child nutrition as well as debt service. And so we'll start by looking at the general fund. And the adopted budget was for local revenue of $445.1 million. We're currently projecting $442 million. which is 99.3% of our budget. So we're very close overall to our total local revenue. You'll see there are some differences. Our tax collections, we're currently projecting to receive about $6.5 million less than what we included in our budget. The majority of that is actually prior year tax collections. So for our current year tax collections, we've collected all but $1 million is what we're projecting, but it's our prior year collections that are lagging behind. One of the other large differences is in interest earnings. We had budgeted $8 million. Interest rates were still fairly strong for this past year, and so we're currently projecting almost $12 million, and so $4 million almost above our projected budget. So the next page is our state revenue, and our state revenue is currently projecting to be lower than what was included in our adopted budget for a few different reasons. On the foundation school program, the lower projection is due to we had higher T2 values than what we originally projected, and so that's going to draw down our state funding. We also had lower ADA than what we were anticipating. And then our original budget included a higher hold harmless amount from the state than we actually ended up receiving. And so those three factors led to our current projection coming in much lower than our adopted budget. And then on our federal revenue, we're currently projecting to be slightly over our adopted budget by $36,000. So you'll see that, we've talked about this in previous meetings, that our SHARS revenue is much lower than what we had projected for this year. Impact aid, we actually received a little bit more than what we had adopted. So overall, looking at revenue, our adopted budget was $556.5 million. We're currently projecting $540.8 million, so that's a difference of 2.8%. Ideally, we would like to have that lower, probably between 1% to 2%, and so that is a little bit high. And as I stated, the majority of that is from the state revenue. And so we just, as we look at fiscal year 26 later, we just need to continue to look at that estimate to try to get that as close as possible. Now, on the operating expenditure side, we budgeted $561.1 million. We're currently projecting significant savings, so we're projecting $543.4 million. Payroll is projected to go over our adopted budget, and there's a few different reasons for that. The first one is that as a reminder, we budget based on 98% fill rate, or we did for this current year's budget. We actually filled higher than that throughout the year. The other one that made for that difference is our projection includes the one-time payment that took place this year, and that was $5.9 million. And so that wasn't included in the adopted budget, but it is in the projection. Contracted services, we're looking to be under in that area, and that's contracted repairs are coming in under budget. Currently, we're projecting electricity to come under budget, as well as our miscellaneous contracted services, which would include transportation and our subs as well. And then you'll see recapture was very close to our projection. Supplies, significant savings. Campus and departments generally don't spend all of their budget, which is great. I mean, that provides some savings back to the budget. And so we have some savings there. So overall, we're looking at savings of $17.6 million. So our adopted budget included a deficit of $4.5 million. We're currently projecting our total expenditures to exceed total revenue by $2.6 million, but that's before we include the one-time land sale proceeds from the sale of Wager Road. So when you add in that $3.5 million, we're now projecting for fiscal year 25 to end with a surplus of $919,000. So taking a look at fund balance, our fiscal year 24 fund balance the end of year fund balance was $141.1 million. So adding that projected surplus of $919,000 would put our projected end of fiscal year 25 fund balance at just over $142 million. So you can see here on the chart there that the fund balance target for the district is $125.8 million. But that excludes TRS on behalf as well as our recapture payment. And so I also added a note, TEA recommends, and we've talked about this before, that TEA recommends districts have at least 3 months of operating expenditures in their fund balance to help them make cash flow payments before their tax receipts start coming in. And so for us, that would be a little bit higher than our targets. That would be closer to $136 million. But we would still be projecting in the year with a higher fund balance than what TEA recommends. So for child nutrition, we are currently projecting a revenue of $21.3 million and expenditures of $22.4 million, which would be a deficit of $1 million. That deficit, they still have a healthy fund balance, and so that deficit would reduce their fund balance down to $8.3 million, which would be about 4% of expenditures, which is still where they need to be. That's recently been changed. It used to be 3 months. They couldn't exceed 3 months, and that's now been increased to 6 months. And then on the debt service, we're projecting revenue of $226.4 million and expenditures of $229.6 million. And so for the debt service, we're looking at a deficit of $3.2 million. And what that is we're using additional funds for defeasance purposes than what we initially projected. And so for our next steps for the fiscal year 25 budget, we will be bringing to the board at the end of August the final budget amendments for all adopted funds. And then mid-August, last year was August 15th, when the comptroller put out their final T2 values. And so we should receive those by the end of this month, and then we'll see how those impact our summary of finance in September when we get our near final summary of finance. That I'll be happy to answer any questions about fiscal year 25.
No, I just want to say that we will really not know what fiscal year 25 looked like until September, October, November, December 1st, when we get the complete audit for the year, correct?
That's correct, yes. Yeah, I mean, the biggest impact will be the T2 values. And if we don't get the revised values, then we could see that swing by, probably close to $10 million. And so this is based on us getting the revised T2 values. But you're right, we won't see, there'll still be payments that are coming in. We'll make those all the way up until the audit. And so we'll have a final number when the audit's presented in December.
I just wanted to know when we would have a final number. I think I had a question too. Is it still kind of fluid? We can't really say we ended up with this surplus because the numbers aren't final.
Not yet, no.
Okay.
And this projection is based on actuals through June.
Okay, got it.
And we updated what we could through July. The month hadn't closed yet when we put together this projection. And so there is some change that still could take place.
Okay, and remind me the year end again.
8/31.
August 30.
Yes.
Okay, 31. Okay, thank you.
What was the difference? Because hold harmless is, when we saw that difference, hold harmless is based on T2 values, but we budgeted based on DCAD values, correct? Ish.
We budgeted based on what we anticipated our T2 values being, based on the information that we received from our appraisal districts. And so at that time, we were anticipating a pretty sizable hold harmless amount. And once we had the revised T2 values, that for the most part went away.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Taylor.
With respect to the fund balance, and I'm sure it's in here, and I can't get back to the slide. We're supposed to be, what's our target again? Is that the 126 or 131?
Our target would be 125.8.
Okay.
And then the TA recommendation would be 135.9.
Gotcha. But the way we're estimating now, it's 140?
142.
Okay.
Yes. So we would exceed
I'm
that.
trying to see if we end up in a bad shape, as you mentioned, something about 10 million. Would you have enough in the fund balance to absorb that and still meet your fund balance requirements?
We would meet our target. We wouldn't meet what TA would recommend.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
And remind me, that would be a ding, if you will, on the first report.
Yes, I mean, they look at that, but they also look at our cash on hand. And so there's different indicators. Like some look at 60 days cash on hand, but yes, it could. It could impact our first rating.
All right, still up.
Okay. All right, so next we will look at the begin a review of the debt management plan for fiscal year 26. And so as part of the annual review of the debt management plan, the board considers defeasance opportunities for the upcoming school year. So what we're looking at right now is, as part of this annual review, we've worked with Hilltop to identify defeasance and or refunding opportunities for fiscal year 26. And before we get to those opportunities, just want to kind of look at our historical trend of our tax rate. And so you'll see, where it's been since fiscal year 2020. And just as a reminder, the board decreased the INS tax rate by 1 cent in fiscal year 25. And later in the fiscal year 26 budget presentation, we'll talk about the possibility of decreasing that INS tax rate as well for next year. And then the fund balance trend for debt service. Fiscal year 24, we ended with $53.6 million. And as I mentioned earlier, since we're looking to take a little bit more out of our fund balance this year for defeasance opportunities for fiscal year 25, we're currently projecting that to go down to $50.4 million. So on page 36 of the board book is a resolution committing to the defeasance and or redemption of certain bonds. The resolution lists all eligible series. And so there are some series that we really probably wouldn't even take into consideration to defease or redeem, but currently those are all listed in that resolution. And so this next slide shows how much we've saved the taxpayers by doing early payments on our principal by using our surplus debt service funds. And so, as I mentioned previously, the district has saved $33.9 million in interest since 2014, and that's helped us reduce our principal amount by $247 million. And this next slide provides for us the callable bonds through August 15th of 2029. That was put together by Hilltop. And John Martin went through and identified, some of the probably the best candidates and then potential other candidates through discussion, looking at what the coupon rate was, when the maturity is. And so right now, we've identified the best candidates for fiscal year 26 are the 2028 maturity of the 2016 A series and the 2027 maturity of the 2017 series. And those are both highlighted in blue on that schedule. So on the next page, you'll see those identified, and they're highlighted in red. And so the 2016 A bond is to be called on February 15th, 2026, and the 2017 refunding bonds are to be called on August 15th, 2026. So they'd both be eligible to be called and used for next year's debt management plan. And those two together would be a payment of $24.2 million. And so when we get into the looking at next year's budget for debt service, we'll talk about where those funds would be coming from. And so this page, once again, shows what funds would be used or the amount of the funds that would be used, what bonds series would be defeased, and what the percentage of principal would be on each of those. And so right now it's calculating total interest savings of $2.7 million, but of course that's subject to change based on what the rates are at that time. So included on, beginning on page 39 of the board book, is the parameter order, which allows administration to act should market conditions meet the parameters established by the debt management policy and the order. And so you'll see we've listed out what the parameters are within the order. And these are similar as far as the minimum net present value savings of 2%, maximum true interest cost of 5%. We've had that in previous years. The maximum par amount right now we've just included, since we have every series that is listed, we just included the total amount of all the series. And then the final maximum maturity would be 20 years, so August 15th of 2045. And as I mentioned, that just gives administration the flexibility to act if the market suggests that it's would provide us with the savings that we're looking for and meet the parameters that we're looking for. But once again, if we were going to get to that point, we would make sure that we bring that back to the board for approval. And then the final item in the debt management plan review is taking a look at our underwriter pool for next year. And so included in the board book is a list of the top 20 firms ranked by total underwriting engagements since January 1st, 2024, as well as a recommended pool of underwriters for fiscal year 26. And so you can take a look at that list, and we'll bring these back to you on August 25th for approval. So if you have any questions between now and then you can let me know, and we'll follow back up with you on that. So that completes the debt management plan update for fiscal year 26. So I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Got through that one pretty clean.
Okay.
It's a good policy.
I actually talked to another district today about something similar, and I mean, I was just explaining to them how great it is to have that policy because not all districts do. So that provides great guidance to identify those opportunities. So the next item is looking at the fiscal year 26 budget update. And we'll look at property values, property tax compression, which is used to set the M&O tax rate for next year, as well as provide a fiscal year 26 financial forecast. So we've talked about this, previously throughout the year, but just as a reminder, the different components that impact property taxes, property tax rates. So we receive from our local appraisal districts, we receive certified taxable values by July 25th of each year. We submit that information to TEA, and with that information, they calculate what our maximum compressed tax rate is, or our MCR rate. And then we receive values from the comptroller that we use to help determine our state funding. And so looking at our certified property values, and you can see the historical trend of our values, and you'll see that there was a pretty significant dip from 2023 to 2024, and that's because the homestead exemption increased from $40,000 to $100,000. Well, we're now going to look at another dip, and so currently legislation has proposed increasing that from $100,000 to $140,000 for next year. That still has to go to the voters in November, but we are very confident that the voters will approve that. And so what the appraisal districts did is they actually provided us certified values at both the $100,000 and the $140,000. But when we submitted information to TEA to calculate our tax rate, we were to use the $140,000 exemption. And so that's what you'll see on this slide here. And so you can see there's really minimal difference between 25 and 26. So typically we would see that continue to increase. And at $100,000, we would have seen an increase of 5.75% on values over last year. So that instead of $61.4 billion, it would have been $65.1 billion. And so now with the change in the homestead exemption, our values actually decreased by just under $36 million. So fairly comparable to last year. And we've looked at this in previous budget workshops. It's a very confusing timeline to follow, but it just shows the complexity of the tax rate, the tax year. And so as a reminder, tax year 2025 actually impacts fiscal year 25-26. And so we receive our preliminary values from the appraisal district in April. We receive our certified values in July. We have to complete a local property values survey and submit that to TEA by August 1st, and that helps generate our maximum compressed tax rate. And then we should receive our previous year certification of comptroller values by August 15th, as I mentioned. But we won't actually receive our preliminary values for this current year until December. No, I'm sorry, February. So I'm getting ahead of myself there, yes. So just as a reminder, the certified values that we receive in July are used to determine our budgeted tax collections. The preliminary property value study that we received from the comptroller in February helps determine our state funding. So when we adopt our budget, we really don't know what our comptroller values are going to be. So we've gone over how we get to that estimation in previous meetings. And so basically just looking at what has been the correlation between certified values and T2 values over the last few years. And so, you just move forward. In February, we'll receive those values. By August of next year, so August of 26, we'll receive the final values. So our fiscal year is almost over, and we finally have a better idea of what our state funding is going to be. And then that will be reflective in our near final summary of finance after the fiscal year is over in September. Hopefully that's very clear. So on our estimated tax rate, once again, just a historical, so you can see the trend. And we've had tax compression since 2019. So since that time, we've had a 29-cent tax decrease since 2019. Now for this upcoming year, as I mentioned, Senate Bill 4 will allow voters the opportunity to increase the homestead exemption. And Senate Bill 23 allows voters to approve the homestead exemption for those who are over 65 or disabled from $10,000 to $60,000. So since we are very certain that that's going to pass, we're not expected to see any compression to our tax rate because, as I showed earlier, our values at the $140,000 are actually decreasing. They're not increasing. And so they would have had to increase by more than 2.5% to see compression. And so as we continue to talk about our tax rate for next year, there is a disaster revenue option for the district. And so districts are allowed the opportunity to go out for disaster pennies, which are intended to help districts access additional funding to offset costs that they've had due to a disaster. Denton County was included in the state severe weather disaster declaration signed by Governor Abbott back in May of 2024. And we did incur costs due to that disaster. We had some damage to our facilities. And so this funding will help us offset some of the costs that we had due to the disaster. And so the disaster pennies must be adopted by the board in the year following the year in which the disaster occurred, which for us would be fiscal year 26. Disaster pennies only last for 1 year after approval. And so the district is able to adopt up to 4 disaster pennies since we have 4 copper pennies remaining. So as a reminder, the Vader in November 23 included the adoption of 5 of the 9 copper pennies. So we still have 4 pennies that would be available at this time. Since the pennies would be copper pennies, they would be subject to recapture. And each penny would generate about $3 million after recapture. If adopted, the disaster pennies would be included in the tax rate adoption resolution that the board would approve at the end of August, and that would be submitted to TEA. And we would also include the disaster declaration that the governor signed and submit that to TEA. So right now, just taking that information into account, looking at our property tax rate for next year, with a comparison fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 26. The M&O Tier 1 rate, which is the maximum compressed rate, would not change because we don't see any compression due to our values, due to the homestead exemption change. Tier 2 value, or Tier 2 rate would not change as well. Voters approved 13 pennies, and so that would remain the same. But we do have the option of including the 4 disaster pennies on the M&O side. So that would change or increase the M&O tax rate from 0.7469 to 0.7869. Now, the board would have the option to offset that increase by lowering the INS tax rate by those same 4 pennies. So taking the INS rate from 0.3709 down to 0.3309. So the overall net effect would be no tax difference from what we had for this current year. Yes.
With respect to that, if I see how you can reduce the INS rate so that the effect is 0, even though the M&O rate is increasing. But since this lasts only for a year, what would happen the next year after?
Yeah, the next year, the M&O tax rate would go back. Assuming no compression,
Gotcha.
It would go back to what it was before.
Okay, got it.
And then the board would have the decision to make.
To what to do with
INS.
Got it. Thank you.
And in our current capacity allows us to lower the INS rate.
Right.
And the other thing to mention on here, because we've had to put together our notice for public meeting for the meeting that we're going to have on August 25th. And on that notice, we have to show what the average taxable value was for last year versus fiscal year 26, what the tax rate would be, and what the difference for the taxpayer would be. Because of the homestead exemption increasing, the taxpayer would actually see less taxes paid next year on the average homeowner. So even if the tax rate did decrease, if it stayed the same, they would still see a reduction in their tax bill. So as we look at the fiscal year 26 revenue projection, we've looked at the revenue assumptions previously. So the same enrollment projection of 46,402, the same estimated ADA of 43,815, and we got that by basically looking at what was the decrease from fiscal year 24 to 25, and just it was right around 700 students. So keeping that same reduction for next year. Currently, we have what we've calculated as a T2 value for next year. The reason that's underlined, and we have a note below, is that we're still in the process of reviewing this. There's some. We've used TASBO has a calculation tool that we've used to come up with this. But I've also used the method that we used last year and comparing it more to our certified values. And so I would just want to spend a little bit more time digging into that comparison just to make sure, because as we saw this year, having an accurate T2 value is critical. And so at this point, I would say that I feel that this is too low, the calculation that we received from our first run at it. And so I want to spend a little bit more time on making sure that that's correct. And so there could be some changes, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but there could be some changes based on that in our state funding for what we would show you tonight versus August 25th. And so on the M&O and the INS tax rate, have a note on there, just putting what it would be if the disaster pennies were adopted as we just spoke about. And then this next slide, we'll look at certified values at the $140,000 exemption last year to this year. Our freeze adjusted values, so we're not collecting property taxes on the frozen value of those over 65 or those disabled. And so you'll see what that is. That's actually what we're using to determine what our tax collections will be. And then our T2 values. And so just kind of looking at that, 25 to 26 for the certified values, very minimal change. Same thing for freeze adjusted net taxable value. And that's why it kind of hit me. I'm like, I really don't feel comfortable with that T2 value projection, because to me, it should be much closer to what we had this year. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more, as I mentioned, coming up. So just kind of giving some highlights, and we'll go into more detail in just a second, but we're currently projecting tax collection budget of almost $18 million more, and that's due to no tax compression as well as the inclusion of disaster pennies. We're projecting our interest earning budget to go down by $1 million as interest rates are projected to decline over the next 12 months. Our state revenue is an increase from our adopted budget right now of almost $11 million, mainly as a result of House Bill 2, but that is subject to change based on what we decide to do with the T2 values. And then SHAR's revenue, we're going to decrease that by $1 million because, as I mentioned in the fiscal year 25 update, we only received about $1 million this year. We had budgeted $2 million, so I want to get that closer to what the actual was for this year. So right now we're looking at total revenue for next year of $577.8 million. 80% of that is local, 19% state, and just a small 1% is federal revenue. So this next slide breaks down our local revenue in a little bit more detail. As you saw on the fiscal year 25 update, you'll see the sizable increase in tax collections, the interest earnings going down, rent going down just slightly due to the aquatics, and just thinking, well, we're going to have a little bit less for next year. And so still projecting $16.6 million increase from this year's adopted budget on the local side. For the state revenue, we're currently projecting about $5.7 million over our adopted budget. But as you saw in the fiscal year 25 presentation, we're not going to come close to what we budgeted. So I don't want you to take away, we're only getting $5.7 million more from the state. I thought we were getting a windfall from the state. We're actually projecting about $26 million currently over our actual revenue. And as I said before, if we adjust the T2s, that's going to come down. And so that's probably a little bit high, but as of right now, based on what we're using for our assumptions, it's going to be about $26 million more than what we're projecting for the current year. Of that, almost $16 million is for the teacher and staff retention allotment. So that takes up the majority of the increase. And I did want to highlight, I know we're not talking about fiscal year 27 yet. We'll have plenty of time to do that. But currently, when we received our funding estimates from TASBO, Moat Casey, the only additional revenue that we're going to get for fiscal year 27 is to maintain the teacher and staff retention allotment. I mean, we don't have any additional funding for next year, or for fiscal year 27. And so, just putting that on the radar, as decisions are made for this year. One thing I did want to highlight is the state revenue does include a new allotment, which is for basic costs. We're projecting $4.9 million, and that's to help offset any inflationary costs that the districts have seen. That could be utilities, property insurance, appraisal costs. I will say that since 2021, I went back to see what we're paying for fiscal year 25, what we're projecting versus what we paid in fiscal year 21. We're looking at an increase of almost $11 million. So although we appreciate the additional money that we're going to get for this allotment, it doesn't come anywhere close to what we're actually spending. Yes, they're giving us, our projection is $4.9 million, and just for those three categories. I mean, there's other things that obviously have gone up, but just for utilities, property insurance, and appraisal costs, we're now spending, it's $10.6 million more than what we spent in 2021. On the federal revenue side, really not any significant changes other than SHARs, just reducing that $2 million. We added a note in here because at the last meeting in June, we talked about the uncertainty of what we were going to see on the federal revenue side. The Department of Education has recently announced the release of the Title II, Title III, and Title IV funding for next year. So we're not currently anticipating a decline in our federal revenue. However, there's still uncertainty for fiscal year 27 and what that's going to look like. So overall, this year's adopted budget was $556.5 million. Next year, we're looking at $577.8 million, an increase of $21.3 million. On the expenditure side, we're currently budgeting a recapture payment of $22.8 million, which is much higher than the current year. And that is the result of adoption of the disaster pennies. So as your tax collections go up, you're going to pay more in recapture as well. And so I added a note on here just as a reminder that our recapture payment is entirely the result of our enrichment pennies and the possibility of adopting disaster pennies, and it's not our Tier 1 funding. So a lot of other districts are the Tier 1 funding. On the payroll side, for the budget for next year, since our fill rate, as I mentioned earlier, was much higher, we've currently included our budget at 99% instead of 98%. And so that takes into account right-sizing our campus staffing based on our enrollment decline, and also moving subs and transportation from contracted services into payroll. So some of the highlights for the expenditure budget. Our substitute budget is increasing by $3.6 million, which includes moving subs from ESS to in-house, but that's also offset by the reduction in our number of permanent subs. And then we're also looking at increasing our professional salaries by $3.5 million due to the raises that the board approved, as well as the teacher retention increases. Our support salaries we're looking to increase by $10.3 million due to the raises, as well as adding transportation staffing to the budget. And then, as I mentioned, our recapture payment would increase by $9.9 million. And then contracted services would decrease by almost $20 million due to moving subs and transportation in-house. And so this next slide just breaks those categories down, comparing the adopted fiscal year 25 budget to fiscal year 26. And payroll costs, as I mentioned, significant increase there with raises, with the retention allotments, moving transportation and subs in-house into payroll. So currently our staffing plan includes $14.2 million that will be paid for the teacher and staff retention allotment. But that's a fluid number. I mean, as we continue to hire, depending on where those teachers, how much experience they have. And so that's subject to change. What I will highlight on that is that the retention allotment, it's a pass-through. I mean, we're going to receive whatever we pay out. And so it's going to be a wash. And so one thing that I do want to highlight, when we look at expenditures, I could see some say, well, wow, your expenditures are going up significantly. Well, most of that is because of the payment of the retention allotments. And so, and we'll highlight that as we move further down. But you'll see contracted services coming down significantly, recapture going up. Overall, looking at an expenditure increase of $16.8 million, and as I stated, that's pretty much your retention allotments. And so what we've set up in the budget for raises for other staff that aren't included, right now we're currently projecting about $5.4 million. So when you look at the total increase of 16.8, and you think 14.2 of that is for the required retention allotments, we've made a lot of reductions to the budget from last year. And so that number, we would have ended up seeing a number lower than what we adopted this year without those retention allotments. So taking a look at our projection for next year. So currently we're projecting a balanced budget. So with the caveat, yes, and I understand, but we want to make sure that those T2 values are as accurate as possible. And so I would rather, bring to you a deficit budget that I think is more realistic than a balanced budget just for the feel good of the moment. And so we'll continue to work on those. We will provide you with updates leading up to the 25th if any of these numbers change, so that you're aware of any changes before we bring it to you for adoption. We are also, as I mentioned, currently using the retention allotment on the expenditure side that is in our staffing plan. And so that's based on the number of teachers that we think fit in, teachers and other staff that fit into those categories. But on the revenue side, I'd been using what Moat Casey had projected for those numbers. And so we're actually a little bit higher on the revenue side than we are on the expenditure side. So we need to true that up before we adopt. And so with those two, factors, I think that there's a strong possibility we could come back on the 25th with a deficit. I still feel good that it's going to come in under what this year's projected deficit was. Yes. And so, I know a goal of 1% or lower, and so I feel very confident that we'll end up with that. But just wanted to make you aware. And so right now, the fund balance projection, we're basing it on the balanced budget. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we're projecting in fiscal year 25 at just over $142 million. So we would propose that for the end of fiscal year 26 if it ended balanced as well. And so one thing that we do probably need to give some thought to as we get into next year is we show our target, or the resolution that we have for our fund balance target, as I mentioned, excludes recapture and TRS on behalf. So we may want to give some thought to, do we want to also exclude the retention allotments? Because those are really pass-throughs just like TRS on behalf. And so we have offsetting expenditures and revenue. So, that's something that we could, give some consideration to, and then if so, then we can update that going forward into next year. So on the child nutrition budget, we're currently projecting $27.9 million in revenue and $27.3 million in expenditures. So a surplus of $620,000. As a reminder, the board has approved increase in student meal prices to help bridge the gap between what we were required by USDA and also to get us closer to neighboring districts, and also to help respond to increased costs that they're seeing. Included in the budget is 2 additional kitchen techs, and then also cafeteria furniture replacement for 2 cafeterias. And then for debt service, we're looking at total revenue of $192.9 million, and the same thing for expenditures. And the other debt service includes both fees that we have to pay, but also what we think we might be able to use for defeasance or refunding opportunities. And so right now, to make that balance, it's $2.7 million. But as I mentioned, earlier in the looking at fiscal year 26 debt management plan, there's opportunity for more than that. We're looking at possibly up to $24 million. So we're projecting in this year with $50 million in fund balance. So in order to do that for next year, we would use some of this surplus, but then also some of fund balance in debt service. So on the debt service side, the slight decrease in taxable value when we were initially expecting an increase in our taxable value. And so that's resulted in fewer fund opportunities for additional, surplus for additional refunding or defeasements for next year. But as I said, we'll continue to monitor that next year before we make those decisions. And so with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
One quick just point of discussion, Board, is that, of course, to even come close to a balanced budget, we all know that we've made some really, really, really tough decisions. And even to say that by the 25th, if we bring a deficit back, it's going to be, around that 1% or less mark. As we know, we had projected with the school retirements to have a savings of around $2.5 million, and I believe that our community will see that, even if we have to bring a small deficit back to you. And I know as we're answering hard questions from staff about HB2 raises, we talked about that on Monday night. You can see from the budget that we've brought forward that y'all put everything you had in giving raises to all staff. Would you have loved to have considered, additional raises to match the HB2 compensation? Absolutely, you would have. And we still owe you follow-up on market analysis and what pay grades are of concern, along with the stipend review. And of course, HB2 creates more pay compression as it raised that teacher pay at about a 7.5% of the midpoint compared to, a counselor, if you promote into a counselor or other position, assistant principal, things of that nature. But I just want to say, thank you so much for all of the work around the hard decisions that you've had to make, and hopefully you see that came to fruition with the budget that we're bringing to you, the initial draft of it this evening.
Ms. Sells.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that administration's recommendation would be the 4 disaster pennies. Is there any reason to not do all 4? And I calculated that, and am I wrong in that would just maintain at the average homeowner price here in LISD $162 for 1 more year? Is that what I'm seeing?
Yes, it would be a reduction.
If we approved the 4, it would just maintain $162 of their taxes for the next year.
Yes, because it would be offset, but the
Right.
value of the home
Right.
would be decreased with $140,000. So,
But even
if
at
you
the
had,
max-
if you had a $200,000 home, and I know no one has a $200,000 home, but if you had a that's the easy math I can do in my head. If you had the $200,000 home, you'd only be paying taxes on the $60,000 in value. But the rate, yes, would be the same. So we would be flat on our rate. But the taxpayer would see a reduction in their taxes
But in that 4, I'm talking about the 4.
with the 4 cents.
4
because
cents,
that's how
the
much,
4 cents
because
on
that's
an
how much
average.
that's how much we have
Right.
that we did not ask our taxpayers for when we went out for
Right.
the Vader
But it would be just for that 1 year.
for 1
Yeah,
year.
and
That's what, and I'm just trying to put, because what our taxpayers are going to want to know is how that impacts me.
Yeah.
That's what they're going to want to know.
And I pulled up our notice that's going to
Okay.
be posted in the paper for the public meeting. And so based on the average taxable value and keeping the tax rate the same, the average homeowner would see a decrease of just under $141 a year.
Overall, a decrease,
Yes.
but in that 4 cents, we're still, do you understand what I'm saying? That we're maintaining, they're just going to be paying that 4 cents for the 1 year.
That's correct.
So
Yes, yes.
that little bit,
Disaster pennies
is
only
minimal.
apply for 1 year.
Okay.
And then the next year, that,
right,
yes, that
Yeah.
could be reduced.
okay.
Yes.
Dr. Barker.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Dr. Taylor. So I was looking at the fund balance for the projected 26. And with a balanced budget, that doesn't move the fund balance at all, but our expenses go up. Therefore, our target goes up, and the recommended level for TEA goes up. So even though we would still meet our target with no increase in the fund balance in fiscal year 26, we would be under the recommended fund balance from TEA. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yes. I mean, as our expenditures go up, and I'll look just to make sure, recommended would be $144.5 million, TEA's recommendation.
And we'd be at 142.
We'd be at 142, that's correct.
So that's something for us to think about as well, is that, yes, we would still be meeting our target, but we would not be at TEA's recommended. And to go back to your point, Ms. Sells, in fiscal year 27, which I know we'll continue to talk about, but now we're 4 cents under. I know, but our M&O would be down that 4 cents. So that would be another loss of revenue in 27. So,
And I will say, I mean, one thing on that, I mean, as you stated, yes, for that slide we're showing, since it's balanced budget, it would remain the same. Last year, we were able to put money into fund balance. This year, we're projecting it's not a significant amount, but it's a little bit under $1 million. So, I mean, that obviously is the intention, that we're going to be close to our budget, but with, even if we adopted a balanced budget, with the hopes or the intention that we would put some back into fund balance.
Dr. Taylor?
Ms. Sells asked my question. I wanted to know, were there disadvantages to doing the disaster pennies? My other question was, and it may just be something that I read early on that it sounds like doesn't affect anything. I know that the TRS on behalf is a pass-through with the income coming in, the exact amount going out. Why did I think, though, and I'm asking you to speculate on why I would think something, but I thought that they didn't give us the amount of money we needed to cover the TRS part of the retention. Am I remembering that correctly?
You're correct. They're only providing us the amount for the salary increase.
Right.
So the benefits are on the district.
Gotcha.
Yeah, any benefit that the district would pay. I mean, whether that's the portion, our contribution to health insurance, we're going to be on the
Okay,
hook
so,
for that.
but that's in another line item. It would be under insurance or
Yes,
wherever.
yeah, that would,
those
for what we
amounts are.
showed earlier, that would be under payroll costs.
Gotcha.
Because
Understood.
we break out TRS on behalf.
Okay, and
but
we're
not other
absorbing
benefits.
that into our payroll costs.
Yes, yes.
Got it. And then with the 4 cents that Dr. Barker mentioned, the M&O side, that goes away. Also on the other side for expense, though, some of the recapture goes away.
That's
right?
correct,
So,
yes.
and even though it might not be a one-to-one wash,
Right.
it's a smaller amount than what you might think.
Yeah, in essence,
Net effect.
we would probably be close to losing $12 million. I mean, that's what we're projecting
Right.
for this year's budget. So you're right, your recapture would go down by almost $10 million.
Right.
But then your property tax collections would go down by
Right.
almost 22.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Another prime example of unintended consequences when people believe they're doing good, but they don't come and ask the people that do it every day.
I think the larger unintended consequence, or maybe it was intended by the legislature, is that they were very short-sighted in their funding formula, and that we're only funded for 1 year. The state is funded for 2 years, but we're only funded for 1. And I think it's going to create a lot of angst, and that in order, and I know we're talking 2027, we're not talking this year, that in order to give staff raises, we're going to have to find that same amount of money in cuts. So, I mean, that's just a reality. I mean, it's not like, we have another 7 or 8 million for just a 3%. The 3% cost us how much this year, it just 5.4 million,
Yeah.
but that's because the others are coming. So I'm going to round that up to 6. I'm going to get a little bit of inflation there. So we're going to have to find $6 million in cuts for next year's budget. I want to make that very clear. This isn't in the future. If we want to just give a 3% raise plus more. So unfortunately, I would say that I don't think painful decisions are over, Dr. Rapp. I think we're going to have to make more painful decisions, and that is because of how the legislature has structured HB2. I do have a question on the debt service fund balance. I don't recall that we put a minimum on that, and maybe I am not remembering correctly.
I don't recall seeing a minimum,
Okay.
but I
So
can go back
that
and look.
becomes my question. What is the minimum in that? I'd like for that to be looked at. What is the minimum amount we need in that? Because I'm also trying to now create some capacity with what we have left over. At one point in time, I remember it was when Ms. Sells was president, because I remember having the idea right before the meeting on the 25th. And we had an excessive amount in our debt service management, and we had the opportunity to just pay off. It was like $13 million, as I recall. We could pay that off very easily. So I would like for you to look at to see exactly what you think that minimum needs to be, so that we could use any of that excess to once again create some capacity in our INS, which I always say is the one fund we control. We could create some capacity in that fund while still having money in that fund balance, in that debt service balance, because that's just a calculation. We know exactly how much our payment is going to be every year. I mean, it's a math problem. So I'd like to see what that trend should be.
Okay.
If I'll be honest, if it's 25 million, then that gives us an opportunity to defease 25 more million.
Right. Yeah, and we can get that information. Some of it in the future is going to be dependent on what our growth is and what they do with homestead exemptions. So if they continue to adjust that, then we won't see the growth that we're anticipating.
For example, we're seeing with the new trend, you said we would have had about a 5% growth. Well, that 5%, in all fairness, is what we have used in the past to project out what our debt service management payment was, so that when we went to the taxpayers and we were like, we can keep this flat, there was an assumption of growth in that when we talked about that to taxpayers. So I want that to kind of all be part of the conversation, that it's not just one thing, it's everything affects that. Anything else from anybody? Anything else you want to add?
Well, I did just want to mention there's a draft of the budget book in your packet there. We'll continue, as I mentioned, if there are any changes, we'll keep you updated between now and the 25th, and then bring you a final budget book for the 25th.
All right. Well, if there is no further business, this meeting is adjourned, and the time is 7:01 p.m. Have a pleasant evening. I think that's the most efficient we've ever